When I was saying goodbye to my friend at the airport, I suddenly saw my daughter-in-law sitting in the waiting area, embraced by an older man. I approached slowly, making no sound, and decided to listen to what they were talking about. Tomorrow at the trial, I'll pretend to be the victim of a violent husband. Wait until you see my great performance. I barely smiled and dialed my son's number. If you're watching this video, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far this has reached. I'm glad you're here. That morning I woke up early when dawn was barely peeking through the window. Today was the day to say goodbye to my dear friend Grace at the airport. She has no family here. She only has me, her friend of so many decades, as her only farewell. Grace was going to Phoenix to visit her daughter, and I wanted to do something so she'd feel a little warmth of home before her trip. I wrapped some apple turnovers from yesterday. I put them in a small container, thinking she could eat them on the way. I took a taxi, one of those old cars that always smell a bit like motor oil. Grace sat beside me telling me about everything, how her daughter had just had her grandson, how her house's heater had been broken for a week and nobody was coming to fix it. On the way to Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, the streets were packed, a sea of hurried people. But I just wished time would pass more slowly so I could save those moments of calm with Grace. Upon arriving at the airport, we looked for a corner in the waiting area of Terminal 2, right near her departure gate. The seats were ice cold, the air smelled of disinfectant, and the loudspeakers wouldn't stop announcing flights. Grace set her bag on the floor, took out a photo of her grandson, and showed off the baby's big eyes. Then she got up saying she was going to the bathroom for a moment. I nodded and decided to take a walk to stretch my legs. I walked slowly, observing the coming and going of people. The airport is like a miniature world, a place where everyone arrives and leaves carrying their own stories. I stopped near a cafeteria intending to buy orange juice, when suddenly my heart skipped a beat. About 30 feet from me, in a row of seats further inside, I saw Jessica, my daughter-in-law, the person who was supposed to be at home, or at least somewhere I knew about. But she was here, at the airport, without saying a word to me or to Michael. I stood stiff, feeling as if someone was squeezing my chest. Jessica wasn't alone. Next to her was an older man, well-dressed, with an impeccable gray suit and a Rolex that gleamed under the lights. He carried a leather briefcase with an air of power, but his smile had something that froze my blood. Jessica hugged him, leaned close to his ear to whisper something, and then let out a little laugh. She straightened his shirt collar. She adjusted his tie, a gesture of strange intimacy. I stood there with my feet glued to the floor, my head spinning. I took out my phone with trembling hands, pretending to send a message. I recorded a short video, secretly. I don't know exactly why I did it. Maybe it was instinct, the desire to have proof so I wouldn't convince myself later that I had seen wrong. Just at that moment, a gust from the air conditioning made some papers they were looking at fall. Jessica bent down to pick them up, and her laugh sounded again, clear but sharp. I heard her say perfectly, "At the courthouse, I'm going to be the victim of a violent husband. You'll see what a good actress I am." Her words were like a knife straight to the heart. A violent husband. She was referring to Michael, my son, the son I raised, whom I've loved all my life, the one who has never raised his voice to anyone. I stood frozen, with my heart racing and my breathing agitated, as if they had stolen all the air from the airport. I backed away quickly and hid behind a large column, afraid they would see me. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. What was Jessica doing? Who was this man? Why was she talking about Michael like that? I tried to breathe deeply, but my chest hurt. All these years I had tried to love Jessica like a daughter, even though she always kept her distance from me. I thought it was just her way of being. But now I realized there was something deeper, something darker. Grace returned with a bottle of water and asked me, without giving it much importance, why I was so pale. I shook my head, forcing a smile, and told her it was probably the tiredness from standing so long. I couldn't tell her anything, not at that moment. I walked her to her gate, watching as her figure disappeared behind the security checkpoint. When Grace left, the airport suddenly felt empty, just like my heart in that instant. I called a taxi and got in with my head a mess, looking out the window. The city passed by like a blur of colors, but I had no mind for anything. As soon as I sat in the car, I took my phone and dialed Michael's number. When he answered, his voice sounded normal as always. "Mom, what happened?" I breathed deeply, trying to keep my voice from shaking, though inside I felt a hurricane. "I need to see you tonight." "Son," I said in a faint voice. "Just you and me. It's important." Michael stayed silent for a moment and then responded, "Sure, Mom. I'll come tonight." I hung up before he could ask more. I asked the taxi driver to take me straight to my house, a place where I could be alone and think calmly without anyone bothering me. That night, I met Michael at a discreet little cafe on the corner of Maple Street, a secluded place that nobody from Jessica's family knew. I needed a space where we could speak openly. I arrived early and chose a table in a corner near the window, but hidden enough so nobody could see us. The cafe was dimly lit, the kind of place where secrets could be spoken aloud. Yet even with a steaming cup of tea between my hands, I felt frozen inside. I sat there with my gaze lost on the street. Cars rushed past, the streetlights flickered, but nothing managed to calm my anxiety. I checked my phone. The video I recorded at the airport was still there, like living proof that was also an open wound in my heart. I wondered if I wasn't exaggerating, if maybe I had misinterpreted Jessica. But then the image of her caressing that man's neck and the calculating tone of her voice returned to my mind, and I knew I couldn't be wrong. About 15 minutes later, Michael entered, his hair neatly combed. He wore a white shirt, but his gaze was full of worry. "Mom, you had me worried," he said while sitting in front of me. "What happened? Why did you have to meet me here?" His voice was soft, but I noticed a touch of confusion. Michael has always been a good son, always looking out for me. But today, I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. I breathed deeply, trying to maintain calm, but my hands trembled as I took out my phone. "Look at this," I said, passing him the phone with the video ready. Michael took it, staring at the screen intently. I watched each one of his gestures, how his curiosity transformed into doubt, and suddenly he laughed. His laugh was sharp and empty, like a door slamming shut. "Oh, Mom," he said, leaving the phone on the table. "I already know what you're thinking, but it could be a partner, a colleague. Jessica supports many community projects. She knows a ton of people. Seeing her being friendly with someone doesn't mean she's cheating on me." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I had prepared for many reactions, but not for such a complete denial. "Michael," I said with a trembling voice. I heard perfectly what Jessica said. She mentioned that she was going to play the victim, that you hit her. "Son, I know you're not like that." I tried to maintain composure, but I was burning up with anger and fear. I told him in detail what I had heard at the airport. Every word, every gesture of Jessica with that man. I wanted Michael to understand that I wasn't making anything up, that I had seen it with my own eyes. But Michael's expression tightened with annoyance. "Mom, you're distrusting my wife," he said, raising his voice a little. "Jessica is a good person. She's sweet. She always takes care of Emma and me in everything. She's not the type of person who would invent something so absurd." "Are you sure you heard right? You didn't misinterpret it?" I felt as if someone was drowning me. My son wasn't standing with me. He was standing with her. "Look at it carefully," I said, almost pleading. "That's not the way someone talks to a colleague. I don't want you to suffer, but I can't let them deceive you." I looked him in the eyes, hoping to see a hint of doubt, a bit of hesitation. But he pushed my hand away, as if wanting to discard everything I had just told him. "It was surely a misunderstanding," he repeated with a harder voice. "Don't make a drama out of this, Mom. I trust my wife. Jessica loves me, and I know she wouldn't do anything to hurt our family." A knot formed in my throat, and I couldn't say anything more. I thought Michael would at least listen to me, that he would ask questions, that he would want to know the truth. But he chose to believe Jessica. He chose to protect her instead of his mother. I stayed there with the phone still in my hand, feeling like the world was collapsing on me. Michael got up, gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder, and softened his voice. "I understand that you worry about me, but this time, you're exaggerating. I have things to do, so I'm leaving." He looked at me, forced a smile, and turned around to leave the cafe. I was left alone, under the dim light of the place that illuminated my cup of tea, now cold. My hands kept trembling, and the phone rested on the table like a reminder of my failure. I had hoped this conversation would make Michael open his eyes, that it would help us face the truth together. But instead, I only received his denial and felt an invisible distance grow between my son and me. I wondered since when had Michael become so blind? Since when did Jessica have so much power to make my son stop believing his own mother? 3 days after the talk at the cafe, my heart still felt heavy as a stone. Michael didn't believe me, and that hurt more than what I had seen at the airport. I knew I couldn't force my son to see the truth if he wasn't ready, but I also couldn't sit with my arms crossed. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, was hiding something, and I decided I would find out on my own. I didn't call Michael again. I didn't want to bother him anymore. Instead, I started observing in silence, waiting for an opportunity to better understand what was happening. Michael had told me that lately he and his wife were very busy, so I offered to pick up Emma, my granddaughter, from Lincoln Elementary School. Every afternoon I stood in front of the school gate, watching the crowd of children come out and feeling relief when I saw Emma's radiant smile. That 4-year-old girl was my light, the reason I tried to stay calm in the middle of this storm. One afternoon I took Emma to a bakery near the school where they sold the chocolate cupcakes she loved so much. We sat in a corner while the afternoon sun streamed through the glass, illuminating Emma's shiny black hair. The girl ate and told me things about school with her clear little voice like a bell. But suddenly, she stopped. She looked at me with her big round eyes and said in a low voice, "Grandma, yesterday I saw a paper in my mom's purse. It said that Daddy hits her." Her words were like a punch to the stomach. I left my glass of juice on the table, trying to make my voice sound as calm as possible, although my heart was beating 1,000 times per hour. "Did you see anything else, my love?" I asked, with all the gentleness I could. The girl nodded, squeezing the little spoon with her tiny hands. There was a drawing of a hand with bruises. It looked very ugly. "Grandma, but Daddy has never hit Mommy. Daddy only hugs her." My heart shrank. A 4-year-old girl, so innocent and pure, seeing things she shouldn't. I took Emma's hand and smiled at her so she wouldn't get scared. But inside, I felt destroyed. A drawing of a hand with bruises. Could that be what Jessica was preparing to set up her story of violent husband that I heard at the airport? I took Emma home, and on the way, I kept asking her more things, being careful not to alarm her. "Have you seen your mommy go out with any man you don't know?" I asked, as if I were telling her a story. Emma hesitated, and then shook her head. But after a moment, she said in a low voice, "One day my mommy said she was going to a parent meeting, but she didn't go to school. I heard the teacher say she hadn't arrived." I stopped, pretending to tie her shoelaces. But really, it was to hide the wave of emotions that invaded me. Jessica was lying not only to Michael, but also to her own daughter. I hugged Emma and whispered to her, "I love you so much, my girl," while I held back tears, not wanting her to see her grandmother fall apart. The next morning, I went early to the market and bought a small notebook, one of those with brown leather cover that I've always liked. I started noting every strange detail related to Jessica. The words she said at the airport, her closeness with that man, and now Emma's story. I wrote carefully, line by line, as if I were painting a picture where each stroke brought me closer to the truth. But I knew these loose pieces weren't enough. I needed more evidence, something more solid, not just to convince myself, but so Michael couldn't deny it. I remembered some bank papers that Michael had asked me to keep when he and Jessica were processing the loan for their house. Luckily, he hadn't changed the password to his online account. That night, when I got home, I sat in front of my old computer and took a deep breath before entering. I reviewed the transaction history and felt my heart stop when I saw several withdrawals of large amounts of money, each one for tens of thousands of dollars. Those transactions had no clear description. They just said, cash withdrawal or transfer. Michael has never been a spendthrift, and I know he's always been very careful with money. Could Jessica be behind this? What was she doing with those amounts? One day, I decided to go to Michael's house, bringing him some cornbread that Emma loves. I told Jessica I just wanted to stop by to see my granddaughter and help a little with cleaning. Jessica smiled as always, but her gaze had something cold, as if she were analyzing me while Emma hadn't arrived from school yet. I pretended to clean the dining table and then secretly entered their bedroom. On a nightstand, I saw Jessica's notebook, the one she always left there. I opened it quickly, my fingers unsteady, and took photos of some pages with my phone. One line made me stop cold. LB, Friday 10 a.m. Withdraw $15,000. I closed the notebook quickly. I left it exactly where it was and came out as if nothing had happened. When I got back home, I checked Michael's account statement again. Just that Friday, there was a withdrawal of $15,000 that matched perfectly with Jessica's note. My heart was beating hard. I felt like I had just found a key piece. But who was LB? The man from the airport? Or someone else? I sat in my small room, looking at my leather notebook, now filled with doubts and fears. I knew I couldn't keep basing myself on loose clues or Emma's innocent account. I needed a professional, someone who could follow Jessica, who could discover what she was really doing. The only person I could think of was Mr. Raymond, a retired police officer, my late husband's old friend. He was the person my husband trusted blindly, and now I needed his cunning to clarify this mystery. The next morning, I prepared a box with warm cinnamon pastries, the ones Raymond always loved, and took a taxi to his small apartment in Riverside. The streets of Sacramento were, as always, full of life, but I didn't pay attention to them. When I arrived, Raymond received me with his usual smile, but his gaze was sharp as a blade, as if he already knew my visit wasn't just for pleasure. We ate together, and I tried to tell him some anecdotes about Emma to lighten the atmosphere, but in the end I couldn't keep pretending. I took out copies of the bank statements, photos of Jessica's notebook, and told him everything I had seen at the airport. Raymond sat with an unlit cigarette in his hand, listening to me with a furrowed brow. When I finished, he stayed silent for a good while, and finally spoke with his deep voice. "All right, Margaret. I'm going to watch her for a few days, but you have to act like nothing's happening. Understood? If she suspects something, everything's going to get complicated." I nodded, feeling like a weight was lifted from my shoulders, but deep down I was still afraid that the truth I was looking for would destroy everything I loved. I looked at Raymond, trying to smile. "Thank you, Raymond. I don't know what I'd do without you." He just nodded. He lit his cigarette, and the smoke curled upward, as heavy as the doubts clouding my mind. 3 days later, the phone rang while I was cleaning the kitchen. Raymond's voice was heard on the other side, brief but decisive. "Do you have time? Tomorrow morning I'm going to show you what your husband used to call the raw truth." My heart was beating hard, but I didn't ask anything more. I just answered, "I'll be there." That night I barely slept. I stayed lying down, looking at the ceiling, trying to imagine what Raymond was going to show me. Would it be the answer I was looking for? Or would it be another stab even deeper in my already broken heart? The next morning I arrived at a small coffee shop near the Arden Fair Mall, where Raymond had arranged to meet me. The place was small, discreet, with old wooden tables and an aroma of roasted coffee. I arrived early and sat in a corner hugging a cup of tea to hide how my hands were trembling. Raymond arrived shortly after, wearing an old jacket and a cap, as if he wanted to go unnoticed. He sat without saying anything. He just made a sign for me to look far away, in a corner of the cafe, behind a large plant. I saw Jessica. She wore sunglasses, an elegant blue dress, and her hair pulled back. In front of her was the man from the airport, with the same gray suit and the shiny Rolex. I felt my heart stop. I wanted to get up, go confront her right there. But Raymond put a hand on my shoulder and shook his head. "Stay calm, Margaret." They spoke in low voices, but you could feel the tension. I watched Jessica frown, with her hands gripping the edge of the table. Then she opened her purse, took out a thick envelope, and slid it to the man. He quickly reviewed it, nodded, and put it in his leather briefcase. Raymond, with his hawk's eye, discreetly raised a small camera and took photos of the entire scene. I stayed there, with my breath caught, feeling my blood boil. Money. Again. Money. I knew that in that envelope was very probably my son's money. The money Michael killed himself working to earn. Raymond made a sign for me to follow him outside. We walked, keeping our distance, and saw Jessica and the man go toward the parking lot. They separated. Jessica got in a taxi and the man in an old Toyota Corolla. I noticed the car had several parking tickets stuck to the windshield from parking badly, like a sign of his carelessness. Raymond wrote down the license plate and then turned to me with a grave voice. "That guy's name is Lawson Becker. He's involved in gambling and fraud. When I was in the police, I investigated him. He's no good, Margaret." We returned to the cafe, and Raymond took out a portable printer and instantly printed one of the photos of Jessica, handing over the envelope. When I had the photo in my hands, I felt them tremble. The image was clear, undeniable. Jessica with a forced smile, giving money to Becker. I looked at the photo with immense pain. It was no longer a suspicion, it was living proof that Jessica was doing something shady and that my son Michael was being used by her. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a rage that grew mixed with the pain of betrayal. Raymond gave me a pat on the shoulder. His voice was soft, but firm. "Do you want to confront her? Or do you prefer that I keep watching her?" I looked at him, and then at the photo in my hand. For a moment, I imagined myself standing in front of Jessica with that photo in my hand, asking her directly, "Do you still dare to look me in the eyes?" Raymond nodded as if he already knew my answer. I put the photo in an envelope and carefully stored it in my purse. In my head, a plan was beginning to take shape. After the surveillance with Raymond, I knew I couldn't wait anymore. The photo of Jessica handing the envelope to Becker was a time bomb in my hands, and I decided I would confront her. I chose the Sunset Cafe in the Midtown area, a small, quiet place where Jessica didn't know anyone and would hardly be prepared. I wanted the encounter to be on my turf, where I could have control. Sitting in my small house in Oak Park, I took the phone and breathed deeply before calling Jessica. My voice sounded calm, as if it were any ordinary call. "I want to see you. We need to talk about something private." Through the phone, I noticed a slight doubt in her voice. But in the end, Jessica agreed to meet me the following afternoon. "Of course, mother-in-law. I'll be there," she said with a soft voice that nevertheless betrayed her distrust. I arrived early at the Sunset Cafe and chose a table in a corner where the soft light from the hanging lamps made the atmosphere more intimate. In front of me, I had a steaming cappuccino, but inside, I felt frozen. The envelope with the photos of Jessica and Becker sat on the table, a silent declaration of war. I looked out the window. The coming and going of people in Midtown was like a painting in motion, but my mind wasn't there. I could only think of one thing. Today, I would look Jessica in the eyes and force her to face the truth. Jessica entered punctually, as always. She wore a white blouse, her hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, and sunglasses that covered half her face. She took off her glasses, gave me her usual smile, but I noticed her gaze was cold, calculating. "Why did you call me, mother-in-law?" she asked, with a sweetness loaded with caution. I didn't respond immediately. I just slid the envelope toward her in silence. "Open it," I said with a grave voice, without any emotion. Jessica looked at the envelope, and then at me, as if trying to guess my intentions. She opened it, took out the photos, and in a matter of seconds her face changed. She opened her eyes wide, her mouth half opened, but she didn't say a single word. I rested my hands on the table, making an effort to stay calm. "That money is my son's. And who is the man in the photo? I suppose you know that better than I do." I looked at her fixedly, waiting for an explanation, a reaction, anything. But instead of showing herself nervous, Jessica raised an eyebrow and her lips curved into a mocking smile. "Are you threatening me?" she asked with a defiant tone. I didn't look away, and my voice hardened. "I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you an opportunity. If you think you can hide everything forever, you're underestimating me." My words were like a thrust, and this time I saw Jessica hesitate. A flash of panic crossed her gaze, but she quickly regained her composure. She put the photos in her purse and let out a dry laugh. "I didn't think you would stoop to spying on me. What a disappointment." I felt anger surge through me, but I contained myself and responded coldly. "The same disappointment I felt when I found out you throw away your dignity just to betray my son and support a gambling addict lover." Jessica gripped the strap of her purse. Her lips trembled, but she maintained the tone. "You can say whatever you want, but if you want war, you're going to have it." She got up, turned her back on me, and left, leaving me alone with my cappuccino, now cold. I didn't stop her. I didn't say anything more. I just stayed there. I ordered another coffee and drank it slowly, trying to stay calm. But inside I knew Jessica wouldn't sit with her arms crossed. I had cornered her, and someone like her wouldn't forgive me for that. 3 days later, just as I had foreseen, Jessica counterattacked. One morning, while I was having breakfast with Emma, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages from friends, from neighbors, even from people I barely talked to. They kept coming. "Margaret, is it true what they're saying? Did Michael really do that?" I opened social media and felt my heart stop. A video was going viral. In it, Jessica cried inconsolably with her arms full of bruises and told with a trembling voice, "I had stayed quiet out of respect for my daughter, but that day he slapped me in front of her." She spoke of Michael, my son, as if he were a monster, a wife-beater. The local digital newspapers didn't take long to publish the news. Construction businessman accused of violence by his wife, clear evidence on video. I sat with the phone trembling in my hands, feeling like the world was collapsing on me. The neighbors whispered, His colleagues looked at him with shock and suspicion. And worst of all, I found out that the company had suspended Michael from the big project he was leading. I thought of Emma, how her school classmates would avoid her because of her mother's lies. My soul ached, not only because of Jessica, but because I hadn't anticipated such a low blow. I had pressured her, and now she was getting revenge by destroying my son's honor. I ran to Michael's house. When I entered, Jessica wasn't there. Only Michael, sitting in the living room with his head in his hands. His phone rang non-stop, but he didn't answer. I looked at my son with my heart shrinking. He had red eyes, his face haggard, as if the whole world had turned its back on him. "Mom," he looked up with a broken voice. "You were right. I was wrong, really. I didn't realize who she really was." His words were like a stab, but also a ray of light. For the first time, Michael was accepting the truth. He admitted he had been blind. I sat next to him, without scolding him, without reproaching him for anything. I just put a hand on his shoulder and told him with a soft but firm voice, "Now that you've woken up, it's time to fight, son. I'm not going to let her destroy our family." Michael looked at me with eyes still reddened, but I saw in them a spark of determination, like a small fire that was beginning to burn. I knew the road ahead would be even more difficult, that Jessica wouldn't give up easily. But this time, I wasn't alone. Michael was on my side, and although my heart still ached, I knew I had the strength to move forward. The next morning, I stood in front of Lincoln Elementary School to wait for Emma, like every day. But today, my heart weighed more than ever. Jessica's video had spread everywhere, turning Michael into an abuser in the eyes of the world, and I knew that was also affecting Emma. When the girl came out, I immediately noticed her lost gaze. Her usual smile had disappeared. She dragged her little backpack, walking slowly, as if she carried an invisible burden. I took her hand and smiled at her. "Today I made you chicken soup, your favorite." Emma nodded, but her eyes remained sad, as if her little world was crumbling. When we got to my little house in Oak Park, I went into the kitchen and prepared with my own hands the chicken soup that Emma always asked me for when she stayed with me. The aroma of the soup mixed with fresh cilantro filled the kitchen with warmth, but my soul remained cold. I served Emma a bowl. I sat in front of her and tried to brighten the atmosphere by telling her stories from my youth about when her grandfather and I made tamales together. But Emma barely tried a couple of spoonfuls. She left the spoon and looked at me with her big round eyes, whispering, "Grandma, I never saw Daddy hit Mommy, but at school everyone says Daddy is bad." Her words were like a knife in my heart. I got up, went around the table, and hugged Emma, caressing her soft hair. "As long as you know how your daddy is, that's enough," I told her with a soft but firm voice. "I'll take care of the rest. I'm not going to let anyone hurt your daddy or you." Emma nodded, snuggling against me, and I felt her little body tremble. I wanted to cry, but I held back because I knew I had to be strong, not only for me, but for Emma and for Michael. A while later, when the soup had already cooled, Emma suddenly looked up and said with her little voice, "Grandma, I heard Mommy talking to the lawyer man." She said, "Ready." I cried like it was real. "Tomorrow I'll send you the edited version so you can upload it to the internet." I was paralyzed. The spoon fell from my hand and hit the table with a dry noise. I looked at Emma, trying to stay calm. "Are you sure, my love?" The girl nodded with bright eyes, about to cry. She also said Daddy couldn't prove anything. "I don't understand anything. My parents fought, Grandma." I felt like I was drowning. A 4-year-old girl, so innocent and pure, having to hear those words from her own mother. I hugged Emma tighter and whispered to her, "Don't worry, my life. Grandma is going to fix everything. You stay calm." That night, when Emma was already sleeping deeply in the little bed in the living room, I sat alone in the kitchen, under the yellow and dim light that illuminated my leather notebook. Emma's words resonated in my head like the last piece of the puzzle I had been putting together. Suddenly, old memories came back to me, small details I had ignored, telling myself I was thinking too much. I remembered once when I entered Michael and Jessica's kitchen by surprise, and Jessica quickly put away her phone, deleting a message in a hurry. I asked her, and she smiled nervously. "An old friend bothering. I don't want Michael to see it." I nodded without giving it importance, but now that memory was like a stinging wound. Then I remembered Emma's birthday party last year. While we all laughed and celebrated, Jessica couldn't stop looking at her phone and then went out to the balcony to talk for almost an hour. When I asked her, she just said, "Work stuff, mother-in-law." I believed her because I wanted to believe my daughter-in-law was a good person. And I also remembered when my neighbor, Mrs. Helen, told me with concern that she had seen Jessica in downtown Sacramento with an older man, holding hands. I dismissed it. Impossible. She surely confused her with someone else. But now all those pieces fit perfectly, forming a complete portrait of Jessica's deception. I opened my notebook and with a trembling hand started a new page. Emma confirms conversation between Jessica and lawyer. Direct verbal evidence about fake video. I noted every detail, every word Emma told me, as if writing it helped me stay firm. I knew I wasn't just facing a betrayal, but a meticulously calculated plan to destroy my son. Jessica wasn't only cheating on Michael, but was using Emma, her own daughter, as a tool in her dirty game. That idea made me want to scream, to run to Jessica's house and confront her at that very moment. But I knew I had to stay calm, that I had to act the right way. I got up, took my coat, and called Gabriel Torres, my husband's former lawyer. Gabriel was a clever man who had helped my husband solve many legal problems before he died. I knew only he had the experience to handle this situation. When Gabriel answered, his voice sounded as serene as always. "Margaret, what a miracle. What's going on calling me so late?" I breathed deeply, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "Gabriel, I need to see you. I have a very big problem, and I think only you can help me." He stayed silent for a moment, and then responded, "Of course. Come to my office tomorrow and bring everything you have." The next morning I left my little house in Oak Park with a thick folder under my arm and my heart shrinking. I took a taxi to Gabriel Torres's office in the downtown area, an old building with worn walls and a wooden staircase that creaked with every step. Gabriel's office was on the 4th floor. It was small but organized, with a tiny reception area and shelves full of files. I sat in an old leather chair, feeling like I was about to enter a battle I wasn't sure I could win. But I had no other choice. For Michael, for Emma, I had to continue. Gabriel Torres, a thin man with gray hair and round glasses, greeted me with a warm handshake, but his gaze was penetrating. He was my husband's former lawyer, the one who had helped us win a complicated land lawsuit more than 10 years ago. I put the folder on his desk and with trembling hands opened it. Inside was everything I had compiled. The photos of Jessica handing money to Becker, the detailed transcription of Emma's account, and the withdrawal history that matched Jessica's notes and Michael's bank statement. I looked at Gabriel and told him with a hoarse voice, "This is everything I have, Gabriel. I need you to help me prove that Jessica is lying." Gabriel reviewed each page, each photo with a serious face. He adjusted his glasses and looked at me. "Mrs. Margaret, this is a good foundation, but it's still circumstantial evidence. A judge, especially in domestic violence cases, needs something irrefutable." I felt my heart shrink, as if all my effort wasn't enough. "So what then?" I asked, almost desperate. Gabriel drummed his fingers on the table and responded, "The medical reports. If we prove she falsified the injuries, her whole case falls apart." His words were a ray of light, but also a new challenge. I nodded, trying to stay calm. "And what do we do now?" Gabriel scheduled me for 3 days later, telling me he would contact a forensic expert, Dr. Marina Cordero, who had worked at the Capital City Medical Examiner's office and was a former collaborator of his. "Marina knows how to find the truth in the most tangled files," Gabriel said confidently. I left the office and went down the stairs, feeling a mix of strength and concern. I didn't know if Marina could help us, but I had to trust. On the way back home, I stopped at a corner, took out my leather notebook, and wrote a detailed list of the days Jessica had been absent from home. The times she had said she was going to the doctor or to a meeting. I wanted to make sure Marina had all the necessary information. That night, I had dinner with Michael and Emma at my house. I prepared green enchiladas, both of their favorite dish. Emma sat next to me chattering about school, but I noticed her eyes still reflected a shadow of sadness. Michael was quieter than usual, with eyes still red from the stress of recent days. After Emma went to play in the living room, I stayed with Michael and told him about my meeting with Gabriel and the plan with Marina. "I already got a lawyer," I told him in a low voice. "We're going to clear all this up, son." Michael nodded slightly and looked at me with regret. I don't understand how I didn't realize before, but now "Whatever you say, Mom, I'll do it." Michael's words comforted me, but they also hurt. I took his hand and told him firmly, "I just need you to be strong, and don't call Jessica for anything in the world. Do you understand? She already left the house. We don't need to contact a traitor." Michael nodded with a determined look, although I knew inside he was still a mess. I looked at my son thinking about when he was a child, and I hugged him every time he fell. Now I couldn't take away his pain, but I would do everything possible to protect him. The next day, Gabriel and I met with Marina Cordero in a small laboratory inside an old medical complex in the city. Marina was a woman in her 40s, with short hair, an impeccable white coat, a sharp gaze, but a soft voice. She received the entire file that Jessica's side had presented in court, including the medical reports of the injuries that, according to her, Michael had caused her. Marina reviewed each page, taking quick notes in a notebook, and then looked up and asked me, "Do you have more information about the days she went to the hospital?" I gave her the list I had written, along with the photo of Jessica and Becker at the airport. Marina examined it carefully and pointed to a detail in the file. She attaches a photo with a bandage on her right hand, but in this photo from the airport, the one that's bandaged is her left hand. My heart skipped a beat. A small detail, but it was like a crack in Jessica's wall of lies. Marina continued, "I'm going to review the metadata of these photos and request the admission records from Mercy General Hospital, where she claims she was treated. If there's any inconsistency in the doctor's signature or in the schedules, we'll have our proof." She promised to have preliminary results in 2 days, and I felt a spark of hope. I looked at Marina, containing my emotion. "Thank you, doctor. I just want the truth to come to light, for my son and for my granddaughter." 2 days passed since the meeting with Marina, and every second was a test for my patience. I was in my little house in Oak Park with a cup of cold coffee in my hands, staring at my leather notebook where I had documented every detail of Jessica's lies. When the phone rang, I jumped and almost knocked over the cup. It was Gabriel. His voice was grave but decided. "Mrs. Margaret, Marina has the results. Come to her laboratory tomorrow, please." I nodded, although he couldn't see me, and responded, "I'll be there." That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed in bed thinking about Michael, about Emma, and about everything that was coming. I knew this meeting could be decisive, but I was also afraid that the truth wouldn't be enough to defeat Jessica's lies. The next morning I arrived at Marina's laboratory in the old medical complex that still preserved that characteristic disinfectant smell of hospitals. Marina's office was small and organized, with a white board in one corner, full of diagrams, arrows, and notes. Gabriel was already there, sitting in a corner with a cup of coffee, his gaze as sharp as always. Marina stood in front of the board with her impeccable white coat and short hair and began to explain. Her voice was calm but firm. I thoroughly reviewed the medical file that Jessica's side presented and found several serious problems. She pointed to a photo on the board, the image of Jessica with a bandaged arm that was supposedly an injury caused by Michael. First, the metadata of this photo indicates it was taken at 9:12 a.m. with daylight, but the medical report says she went to the emergency room at 10:45 p.m. at night. Something clearly doesn't add up. I felt my heart race like a drumbeat. A small detail, but it was like finding a crack in Jessica's wall of lies. Marina continued, "I'm going to review the metadata of these photos and request the admission records from Mercy General Hospital, where she claims she was treated. If there's any inconsistency in the doctor's signature or in the schedules, we'll have our proof." She promised to have preliminary results in 2 days, and I felt a spark of hope. I looked at Marina, trying to contain my emotion. "Thank you, doctor. I just want the truth to come to light, for my son and for my granddaughter." 2 days felt like 2 years. Every second was a test for my patience. I was in my little house in Oak Park with a cup of cold coffee in my hands, staring at my leather notebook where I had documented every detail of Jessica's lies. When the phone finally rang, I jumped and almost knocked over the cup. It was Gabriel. His voice was grave but decisive. "Mrs. Margaret, Marina has the results. Come to her laboratory tomorrow morning, please." I nodded, although he couldn't see me, and responded, "I'll be there." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in bed thinking about Michael, about Emma, and about everything that was coming. I knew this meeting could be decisive, but I was also afraid that the truth wouldn't be enough to defeat Jessica's lies. The next morning, I arrived at Marina's laboratory in the old medical complex that still preserved that characteristic disinfectant smell of hospitals. Marina's office was small and organized, with a white board in one corner, full of diagrams, arrows, and notes. Gabriel was already there, sitting in a corner with a cup of coffee, his gaze as sharp as always. Marina stood in front of the board with her impeccable white coat and short hair and began to explain. Her voice was calm but firm. I thoroughly reviewed the medical file that Jessica's side presented and found several serious problems. She pointed to a photo on the board, the image of Jessica with a bandaged arm that was supposedly an injury caused by Michael. First, the metadata of this photo indicates it was taken at 9:12 a.m. with daylight, but the medical report says she went to the emergency room at 10:45 p.m. at night. Something clearly doesn't add up. I felt my heart accelerate, as if we had found a major crack in her story. Marina continued. Second, I contacted Mercy General Hospital. The security cameras don't register Jessica entering the trauma area that day. According to their logs, she paused, looked at me, and added, and most importantly, the doctor who signs the report, Dr. Rodriguez, retired 6 months before the date that appears on the document. I stayed seated, gripping the arms of the chair, trying to contain my emotion. Every word from Marina was a hammer blow demolishing Jessica's wall of lies. She pointed to another analysis on the board. The bruise in the photo wasn't caused by a direct impact, like a punch. It looks more like it was created by prolonged pressure or constant rubbing, the type of injury we usually see in people who self-inflict wounds. Marina looked at me directly and lowered her voice. This is clear evidence of falsification of medical documents. Gabriel nodded, and for the first time I saw him smile, even if it was sideways. With this, it's enough, he said with a confident voice. I'll present this analysis to the judge immediately and request that the investigation be reopened. I looked at Gabriel and then at Marina, feeling like an enormous weight was lifted from my shoulders. But at the same time, I felt a fire burning inside me, not of rage, but of determination. I had come too far to stop now, and now the truth was on my side. As we left the laboratory, Marina stopped me and whispered, Mrs. Margaret, thank you for not staying quiet. Many mothers prefer to take a step back, but you didn't. Her words moved me. I squeezed her hand gently, holding back tears. I'm not doing this just for me. I'm doing it for my son and for my granddaughter. Marina nodded with a look full of empathy, and I knew she understood what I was going through. On the way to Gabriel's office, we prepared the file. Gabriel called the court secretary to request an appointment and present the new evidence. In his small office, Gabriel and I sat facing each other, printing every page of Marina's analysis, reviewing every detail to make sure our presentation was solid, without cracks. Gabriel even contacted a professional video editor who would help us create a montage with all the images and evidence to project it in court. We have to make everything very clear, so the judge doesn't have a single doubt, Gabriel said with eyes full of determination. When I got home, I called Michael. When he entered, I saw that his face was still haggard, but his gaze was no longer so somber. I told him everything Marina had discovered. My voice trembled with emotion. Get ready, son. The next hearing will be where you and I recover our honor. Michael didn't say anything. He just came closer and squeezed my hand tightly. That gesture said it all. His regret, his confidence, and his decision. I looked at my son with a warm but aching heart. I knew this battle wasn't just to prove the truth, but also to heal the wounds Jessica had caused. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, 62 years old. Wrinkles, spots on my skin, and eyes that had seen too much pain. But I also saw a woman who didn't give up. I told myself, the next time I go to court, I want to look different. The next morning, I went to the beauty salon on the corner. I asked them to cut my hair, which was already almost all gray, and dye it black. For the first time in 20 years, when I saw myself in the mirror, I saw a new Margaret. Not just a mother, but a warrior. I smiled at myself, feeling like I had recovered a part of my lost strength. A week after my meeting with Marina, I found myself standing in front of the Sacramento County Courthouse, with my heart heavy but full of determination. That day it was drizzling, and the drops fell on the dark gray coat I had chosen. I wore my hair pulled back in a bun. My new black hair was a reminder that I was no longer the mother who only knew how to suffer in silence. Michael was beside me in a charcoal suit and a dark red tie. the color my husband used to choose when he went to a trial. I looked at my son and saw that his gaze was firm, but also anxious. I took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Today is our day, son." He nodded without saying anything, but the way he returned the squeeze said it all. We entered the courtroom. The atmosphere was cold and solemn. There were more people than I expected. Unknown faces. Some of Jessica's friends and 2 people who introduced themselves as witnesses. Sitting on the opposite side, Jessica entered wearing a light beige dress and a silk scarf, one hand still bandaged and limping slightly, as if to emphasize her role as victim. I looked at her without anger anymore, only with deep sadness. Becker entered behind her with an old leather briefcase and a serious expression, but I could see the tension in his eyes. I sat in the back row next to Raymond, who had helped me silently from the beginning. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and whispered, "Stay calm, Margaret. Today, the truth will speak." Judge Rebecca Salinas, a woman over 50, entered with a severe air, hit the gavel, and the hearing began. Jessica's side presented first. Becker, as her lawyer, stood up and with a grave and emotional voice accused Michael of being an irate, violent man who had threatened the life of his wife and daughter and hidden his violence for years. Each word was a stab. But I stayed calm, gripping the edge of my seat. Jessica got up, wiping away tears with a handkerchief, and said with a trembling voice, "I didn't want to air our dirty laundry, but for my daughter I can't keep quiet." Her performance was perfect, so much so that I saw some people in the room shake their heads with pity, but I knew it was all theater. Gabriel, beside me, took notes calmly, without interrupting. He waited his turn, and then stood up, connecting his laptop to the large screen in the room. His voice was serene, but sharp. "Your Honor, we have evidence that proves the plaintiff's accusations are false." And he began to expose, step by step, each piece we had gathered with so much effort. First, the video and photos from Raymond showing Jessica handing money to Becker. Then the bank statements that matched exactly with the withdrawals noted in Jessica's notebook. After that, Marina's forensic analysis. The photo of the injury that didn't match the time, Mercy General Hospital with no record of her visit, and the doctor who signed the report retired for months. Finally, Gabriel pointed out that the hospital security cameras showed no trace of Jessica on the day she had declared. The room began to murmur. I heard whispers, saw crossed looks among the attendees. Some of Jessica's friends seemed nervous and spoke to each other in low voices. But Gabriel hadn't finished. He asked to call Emma as a witness. When my granddaughter went up to the stand, I felt my heart shrink. Emma, so small in the blue dress I had chosen for her, standing in front of all those people. Her voice sounded clear and firm. "My daddy has never hit my mommy. My mommy said she was going to cry in court so they would kick my daddy out of the house. I heard her tell the lawyer man on the phone." Emma's words were like an icy wind that silenced the room. I looked at her feeling pride and pain at the same time, because a 4-year-old girl had to be there defending her father. Jessica jumped up with a shrill voice. "Children don't know what they're saying. They can't be witnesses. She's making it up." But Judge Rebecca called for order with an icy look. Gabriel continued calmly and presented the last piece of evidence. The video I had recorded at the airport, the scene of Jessica and Becker, so close. She straightening his shirt collar, whispering in his ear and laughing. The room fell into sepulchral silence. Jessica's face turned pale as paper. Her hands trembled, and Becker lowered his head without daring to look at anyone. I stayed there, feeling like the world had stopped, that each beat of my heart sounded louder than ever. Judge Rebecca looked at the entire room, stayed silent for a few seconds, and hit the gavel. Her voice resonated clear and definitive. "The court concludes that the plaintiff's evidence has been fabricated with indications of collusion and falsification of documents. The case is referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation." The sound of the gavel was like the final note of a symphony and echoed in my head. Jessica collapsed, falling onto her chair while one of her friends ran to hug her. She cried, but I knew those weren't the tears of a victim, but those of someone who had been discovered. I stayed still, without celebrating, without feeling victorious. I just looked at the light coming through the courthouse window, as bright as if it marked a new beginning in my life. Days after the trial, I was sitting in my little house in Oak Park, hugging a cup of hot coffee, listening to the singing of sparrows in the yard. News of the case had spread everywhere, from social media to local newspapers. Wife invents domestic abuse. discovered by forensic expertise and security cameras, read one article headline. I read some online comments feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Jessica and Becker had been detained to be investigated for fraud, falsification of documents, and defamation. Justice had been done, but I didn't feel triumphant. Instead, I only felt deep sadness for the family I once thought was perfect, and that now was nothing but broken pieces. I decided to pick up Emma from school as usual. That day, the Sacramento sky was clear and the sun shone strongly over the treetops. When Emma came out through the gate, I saw that the smile had returned to her face. She ran toward me and hugged me tightly, shouting with joy, "Grandma, my friends believe my daddy now. Nobody says he's bad anymore." Her words were like a fresh breeze that calmed my heart. I caressed her head and smiled at her. "That's good, my love. Now let's go home for some chocolate cake." Emma nodded repeatedly and pulled my hand, as if all the sadness had vanished. But I knew that the wounds Jessica had left would take time to heal, not only for Emma, but also for Michael. I stayed a few days at Michael's house. I wanted to be close to help my son and granddaughter overcome these difficult moments. I cleaned the kitchen, dusted the shelves, organized Emma's clothes, and hung the old family photo back in the living room, the same one Jessica had stored in a drawer. In the photo, Michael hugs Emma, and I'm beside them smiling. Jessica also appears, but now my gaze only focused on the people I love. I stood in front of the photo, gently touched the glass, and thought to myself, we overcame it, and we'll move forward. One morning, while I was sitting in the dining room, Michael entered with a steaming cup of coffee. He put it in front of me, sat down, and silently took from his pocket an old handkerchief, the same one my husband, his father, had kept with him during his last years. "You're incredible, Mom," Michael said with a grave voice but full of emotion. "Thanks to you, our family didn't fall apart." I looked at my son. I saw his reddened eyes, but not from pain, but from gratitude. I took his hand and told him softly, "I only did what a mother has to do. You and Emma are everything to me." The next day, I decided to return to my house. Before leaving, Michael and Emma came to say goodbye to me with a bouquet of purple tulips, my favorite flowers since I was young. "For the strongest woman I know," Michael said, handing me the bouquet. I smiled and accepted it, feeling warmth in my heart. We sat in the backyard under the shade of a tree and shared a warm pound cake I had baked that morning. Emma laughed, telling me about a cat she had seen at school, while Michael watched her silently with eyes full of love. In that moment, I felt immense peace, as if all the past pain had been nothing more than a bad dream. That afternoon, sitting alone in my living room, I opened a new notebook. The old leather notebook was full of notes about Jessica, about the days when I fought to protect my family. Now I wanted to start a new chapter. I took a pen and wrote the first line. They might think I'm an old woman, old-fashioned, but it was this old woman who saved an entire family. I smiled. I closed the notebook and left it on the table. I didn't need to write more because I knew this story already had the ending it deserved. I went out to the yard and saw Emma running and playing with the neighbors' children. Her laughter resonated crystal clear. Michael was sitting on the porch reading the newspaper and occasionally looked up to see his daughter with a look full of pride. The wind blew fresh and caressed my new haircut. I stayed there, breathing deeply, feeling a relief I hadn't experienced in a long time. I thought about the past days, about the sleepless nights, about the moments of anguish, and about all the times I thought I would collapse. But I didn't give up. And now I was here, with my family, with love and trust restored. The story you just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I really wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose to stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to recover your voice? I want to know your opinion, because each story is like a candle that can illuminate someone else's path. God always blesses, and I'm convinced that courage leads us to better days. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever faced something like this in your own family? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. Thank you so much for listening until the very end. This is Letters to Helen, and I'll see you in the next story.